10-minute Bible hour. Here we go. You know that thing we all do where we get bored during a presentation and we start nodding off and then snap back awake really uncomfortably and hope no one noticed, but they all did? It's called a hypnic jerk. I find it embarrassing because everybody knows that I wasn't being a good audience member and that I was spacing off. Plus, I had like a giant, weird, involuntary spasm thing in front of a room full of my peers. But you know what would be even more embarrassing than that? Would be having that happen while you're sitting in a window on the third story of a building and it causes you to fall out and die right in front of everybody, ruining the entire event. You don't want to be that guy. Well, somebody in Acts chapter 20 was that guy. And the story has an interesting ending. I'm not going to tell you what it is. And the only way you can find out is to watch this video because that information is not available to you anywhere else. And what you, my friends, have just witnessed is a master at work at the art of baiting the hook. The second half of this passage picks up right where we left off in the last episode with this big, giant, dumb riot in Ephesus and everybody wanting to punch everybody else and things like that. So for the umpteenth time, Paul has to assess the situation and get out of proverbial dodge. So he does that not just under pressure from what's going on in Ephesus, but also with a general sense of mounting pressure empire-wide. This is happening in 57 AD, but in 54 AD, a kid named Nero became emperor, and people knew this kid was a little bit unhinged right from the get-go. He came to power through pretty nefarious means, and by nefarious, I mean his mom poisoned his stepdad to death so that he could be in charge. And then after Nero ended up in charge, he had a kid stepbrother who was the legitimate son of Claudius, the previous emperor. And this kid Britannicus was just about to have his coming of age 14th birthday party where he becomes a man and able to, do stuff in Roman society. And the night before, he just happens to get poisoned by exactly the same guy who poisoned his dad. So everybody can tell that stuff's going a little bit crazy. The imperial court is fracturing. Nero is unpredictable. Nobody knows what this means for trade, let alone for an up-and-coming religion that could be viewed as a threat to the empire. Well, those concerns were well-founded because eventually it's Nero who unleashes the first big persecution against Christians with some pretty insane stuff that we'll talk about in another episode. So this is sort of a new era in Paul traversing the Mediterranean as he goes and checks in with people. This is the close of his third missionary journey, and it feels like this might kind of be it for Paul. From chapter 20 on, there's this sense of impending closure, maybe even impending doom. So he goes and collects all of these Greek guys who he's worked with. And it's really easy to just get to the couple of verses that list all these guys off and buzz through it and be like, well, okay, there's some guys and they traveled. But every one of these people were leaders. They were vested. They probably had families. They're coming from all these different cities. So this means they viewed themselves as part of a much bigger team. Probably we pick Luke back up along this travel somewhere, maybe in Corinth. And now you've got Paul's all-star team rolling back toward Jerusalem, in part to go back and serve the church that started this whole thing, or the two in Jerusalem and Antioch. And that in itself is really cool, because if we go all the way back to the beginning of this book in Acts 1:8, 80 episodes ago, Jesus is there with the disciples, the 11 that were left that still had their intestines inside them. And before he ascends into heaven, he says, go hang out in Jerusalem. Holy Spirit's going to show up, and here's your job. You will be my witnesses to Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And we get the Jerusalem section, and then we see the Judea section, and then the Samaria thing happens. But Paul is the one who's really pressing this thing to go to the ends of the earth. But how interesting that nobody from the first part of the book, nobody who was there for the initial commissioning, is still even a part of the team, at least on camera. Now, there are other places doing other stuff that matters, but the implicit message, especially if you're watching this and you're like me and you're in on this thing and you believe this stuff, is, wow, it's kind of cool. Like the baton's already handed and we get our little turn to participate in this thing and be on the stage of it all. Whatever the case, Paul makes a bunch of travels. This is a quick conclusion to his third missionary journey. He makes his way around Greece and back to Troas, and that's where we pick it up at an emotional meeting, the upper story of a room late at night. Part 2 picks up in Troas on April 24th, 57 AD. It's a really unique thing when you're studying the Bible to look at an event and be able to say, that's probably exactly the date where this thing happened. Because of when the festivals were and where Paul was traveling and who was in charge at this time, we can pretty much certainly triangulate it. So that's fun, especially if you ever become a time-traveling prankster. You can knock that one out of the park. Well, what happened at this event is that Paul gets together with a bunch of elders and important people who he is having a goodbye evening with. They break bread together, they pray, they talk, and Paul is giving what I guess you could characterize as a sermon, but I'm not sure that's fair. This seems more like a friendly, brotherly, goodbye forever exhortation. I've not had a lot of, you'll be dead the next time I see you, so we need to say our goodbyes meaningfully right now type conversations. But the couple where I've even suspected that have been hugely emotional, and I haven't wanted to rush right through it. And I imagine that Paul was going on and on in this talking that Luke characterizes as going clear on into the night and being very, very lengthy. Well, there's this kid named Eutychus who is here at this event that he maybe sort of understands, but he's in the window. They're meeting in an upper story. It's April in the Mediterranean, so it's going to be warm, but up there you get a little breeze, and so it's more comfortable. And I just picture the warmth of the room mixed with that gentle breeze, mixed with Paul's soothing voice, and the pleasant glisten of candlelight off of his glowing bald dome. Rocked this poor kid to sleep, and he hypnic jerked right out the window to his grisly death, which I don't even think is a negative characterization of the kid. It's not like he was being bad. He's a young man, and as a young man, he wouldn't have been around for most of this stuff, and he would not have understood the gravity of the situation. Once again, he wouldn't have understood the gravity of the situation, because gravity is the force that acted upon him to fall out of the window and die, which is why it's a funny joke. Well, I'm having a great time with this, but one time in my life, I was around a situation where a kid died, and it was not fun. Everybody was in a very dark place immediately. It was enormously sobering, and I imagine that that would have been the response of the room. It's already emotionally supercharged. Oh yeah, and this kid who we all care about just died before our eyes. They're looking out the window. They see him down there. He's not moving. They go down and they figure out he's dead. In fact, there's a physician on site. It was Luke. That's probably who pronounced him dead. But the text talks about Paul going down there, throwing himself on the young man and putting his arms around him and saying, "Don't be alarmed. He's alive." Then he went upstairs again and broke bread, and after talking until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home and were greatly comforted. Well, that's the understatement of the century. You've got this really unusual sequence, and it almost seems odd that this would be in the Bible. And this is not the point of the passage, but for somebody like me who is very idea-driven and very passionate about ideas, I know what it can be in my own life to hard charge to the point that every now and then you kind of forget about people. And I think it's just cool that in this passage, the Bible slows down on this big, important, giant, save the world mission story to say that little kid who fell out the window is really important too. So certainly, if nothing else, a very interesting way to wrap up Paul's time in ministry with this particular group of people. Last thought. This passage isn't particularly applicable. If somebody you love falls out of a window and dies, I don't think you're going to get the same result. So what do you do with it? Well, I think it's important for the narrative, first and foremost. It's a pivot. We've been in this section where Paul is going from town to town, and we're seeing what it looks like when the message about Jesus shows up in this culture, or this political environment. And now we're fast forwarding to the end of that, and we're on this inevitable march back toward Paul's fateful journey to Jerusalem, which we anticipate is going to result in a fateful journey toward Rome. Over the last few weeks, I've got a few messages from people who use this series for small groups or get-togethers that they do. And all of you are wondering if I was ever going to make any more videos because I've been on a bit of a hiatus. I'm sorry about that, and thank you for the really nice messages and for using this in your groups, by the way. And also, hi, everyone in those groups who looked me up. I am still going to make these videos. I'm still very committed to it and having tons of fun. Had some health issues, some family stuff, and I was launching my new podcast called No Dumb Questions, which is up and running, and you should probably look into that because I think it's worthwhile. But long story short, yeah, we're going to keep doing this for sure. And I'm already working on the series that's going to come after Acts, which is going to be about, well, what happened after Acts. It's going to be a shorter series, but it's going to be a blast and hopefully cover a bunch of stuff that's just brand new material to people. So I'll keep working on this. If you like what's going on, you know the drill, subscribe, share. I'm Matt, this is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and I really appreciate you being a part of this thing with me. See you soon.